Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 18 of the Live Your Jam podcast. I'm Ellen McGinnis, your host. And I've spent a number of episodes talking about the mind. I believe that, the mind is the body's gift to us. It strategizes, plans, protects, and problem solves. But when we confuse it for the whole of who we are, when we let it run the show unchecked, it becomes a dictator rather than an ally. And we lose access to something deeper, which I believe is the soul. And intuition, for me, is the language of the soul. So today I'm talking with someone who's spent decades sitting with human beings at their breaking points and helping them find their way back. Dr. Don Zaksek is a psychologist, a former Air Force captain, a man who's walked alongside veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. He works with high achieving athletes and men navigating the quiet devastation of lives that might look fine on the outside, but may be challenging on the inside. But what makes Dr. Don different from most clinicians I've encountered is this: he doesn't just work with the mind, he sees beneath it. He's built a body of work that he calls the third way. And it's a framework rooted in the radical idea that most of us don't get stuck because we lack knowledge or resolve. We get stuck because we can't see clearly, because stress and pain have cracked what he calls our lens. And until that changes, no amount of willpower, insight, or technique will move us forward. So that idea that the healing begins with not just with feeling better, but seeing better is something that I believe in deeply and is a thread throughout all of my work. So today we're going to go deep inside what that actually means, what it costs, and what is possible on the other side. So Dr. Don, welcome to the Live Your Jam podcast.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I've read your work, Ellen, and I've listened to some of your podcasts with your guests, and it's really a privilege to be here. I appreciate the kind introduction, and I'm really looking forward to our time today.
I am as well. Thank you. So let's just dive right in. Your credentials are impressive. You're an Air Force captain. You have your doctorate from Wright State University, decades of clinical work. But your writing, tells a different story about who you actually are. You nearly died. You've lost people you love. So tell us about the man behind the title. Like, what shaped you before your degree?
Well, it's a great question. Yeah, the titles and everything, those are the masks I wear, not really me, right? Those are the things we all put out there to get people to listen to us or be accepted. But the real me, I think, is somebody who's fallen flat on his face a number of times, but has kind of maybe tried to believe in something bigger and tried to move forward despite that. And I actually think that helps me connect with a lot of the men on my caseload, right? That idea that you don't have to be perfect. And, I work with so many people who've gone through hard things in their life, and many of them were not fortunate enough to have something that I had as a kid, which is a mom and a dad who were really supportive, but taught me that you can be vulnerable, you can make mistakes, and also that you're not alone. And I think that those are a couple of things that really come out in my work and help me to maybe connect with some of these amazing people who maybe struggle to feel very alone or struggle with vulnerability.
Yeah, lovely. So you specialize with veterans and high achieving athletes, men who've been trained to perform, endure, and push through. And when these men finally sit across from you, what are they actually carrying? What's underneath the armor that nobody else sees?
At first I just want to express my respect for a lot of these people that I work with. I mean, I work with men and women, but some of the people that you're describing are men who have been hardened by having to do really difficult things. Sometimes it's my combat veterans, right, who have had to put themselves in very dangerous situations and seen and experienced really hard things. And sometimes it's for the brother next to them or for a purpose that they're trying to serve, right? And then sometimes it's a doc or a surgeon that shows up to do a 15-hour surgery on 4 hours of sleep just because it's the right thing to do and they're committed to a team. Or sometimes it's, if you're in the city and you see that guy laying bricks and it's 24 degrees out, right? And there's no glory in that job, right? But they're showing up and kind of doing the right thing. So I see a lot of these people who I would describe as tough and disciplined. And I respect that. And we all benefit from it. At the same time, their strength is their weakness, right? Like many of them were not shown that it's okay to be vulnerable. So they end up feeling very, very alone, like a branch broken off a tree. And also, I see so many of them have what I would call an overdeveloped sense of responsibility. If you have a really strong locus of control, right, which serves a purpose for us. If you're a surgeon, you don't want to make mistakes because bad things happen. If you're a pilot, you don't want to make mistakes because bad things happen, right? And that's fine for being a surgeon or being a pilot or, an athlete who's in a big stakes situation. But those rules don't apply really well to life, right? Because when things do go wrong and you're not a perfect human and you need help or you've made a mistake, oftentimes what happens is you turn on yourself and you blame yourself. And so sometimes it's some of that deprogramming that we're doing in therapy that can help people, A, be vulnerable, but also not hate themselves. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely does. I really appreciated your response because it's not just the objectification of a veteran or a high performing athlete. It's like these are real people. And, in our society, we kind of look up to these sort of warriors and these strong men, but they have a lot, or strong individuals. I love the idea of the Mason at 24 below, like people who are out there doing hard things every day. These are real lives, and we admire them, but there's also and underneath that needs to be explored. And society does tell men, and we come at it from I often represent women and the quiet supporting role that they take and the over responsibility that they feel. And in the work that I do with men leaders is that is the heavy burden of responsibility they feel from the provider and from the I must be strong standpoint. So when I saw your work, I was immediately drawn towards that. You're helping as well, and I know you help women as well, but really you're kind of helping that men who have society puts on them, hey, like you got to keep it all together under every cost and every scenario. So I appreciate just your entire response there. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Ellen. And I have so much respect for women, and I really do think that there's some of the old school patriarchy stuff has been really harmful for women, and it has harmed men too. So I
Yeah, it has.
definitely, I believe patriarchy is very toxic. I don't like the term toxic masculinity because I feel like, masculinity itself is not toxic. And a lot of what we need to do is we need to define what's a healthy masculinity, right? What's some way where a male can be proud of being a man, but in a way that's not oppressive to women, that doesn't stand on somebody else, which patriarchy did. And I don't want to get into the nuances of maybe like defining those terms. We get into the weeds, but in general, just so much respect for women. And I want to try to help men be better so that women suffer less too.
Yeah, same. And the work that I do isn't contra to men. It's actually including them. I'm just focused on women because it's the experience that I know and have embodied in my own life. So really nice intersection there. So I'm going to move on because you're a good writer. I mean, you're an excellent writer. You've written on Medium, and you've got this project that you're working on, The Third Way. But you also wrote an article that I read called "The Veteran." It was describing a man who came in, like meeting somebody. You said you made it, and it was feeling like there was a bulletproof glass around him. And you've written that numbness can feel like relief. Something that men hate the fact that you've taught them to feel again, which is very just life was easier before potentially with the bulletproof glass, with the protection. So why is numbness so seductive? And tell us a little bit about that story, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Simple answer, pain. Numbness is helpful because people don't know how to deal with the pain and oftentimes haven't been taught the skills to deal with the pain. And there's what I would call primary and secondary suffering. Okay. So primary suffering is just the pain of grief. If you've witnessed something terrible or something bad's happened or you've had loss in your life, there's primary suffering and we need to grieve that. And then there's secondary suffering that's caused by our interpretation and evaluation of what happened. And many men can't face the primary suffering because the secondary suffering is too great, right? Because they hate themselves or blame themselves, or there's a narrative that they're fused to that makes the pain too great. So then oftentimes I see men get stuck in some type of addiction. And it can be, anything from alcohol to porn to, anyway, like some type of numbing out, right? Ways to
Right.
disconnect from the world. Violence sometimes, is a way of maintaining control over situations when you can't be vulnerable. So oftentimes what we try to do is really train them up to, first of all, you got to accompany them. You got to step in there with them. They're not alone, that you understand them in a non-judgmental way. And then gradually over time, you can help them become more vulnerable with you and maybe correct some of those distortions that lead to all that secondary suffering.
You're
Um,
going with them through the journey. Yeah, well said. Thank you. I mean, there's a real crisis for men. You kind of touched on some of the challenges, like some of the numbing to, protect themselves. But there is a loneliness, there's identity loss. We're seeing this show up many ways in our society, disconnection, and a culture that doesn't quite know what to do with them, particularly for certain groups of men. But I would say for men potentially across the board here. So what are you seeing about this? And again, what do you think is at the root of what's going on? It's a very big question, but what is your sense of this, what's going on in our society right now with men and their loneliness?
as I said before, I think you asked really good questions. And part of the reason my inspiration for this work, part of it is that, yeah, I see men struggling right now, right? And sometimes when men struggle, who else struggles? Women or society's most vulnerable, or you know what I mean? We can spread our pain everywhere sometimes if we're not doing well. And I think we can see that in many levels in society right now. And I think at the root of that problem is a loss of sense of meaning. There's just pretty good evidence out there that as men, we don't necessarily thrive as much as just pursuing our bliss, but we pursue meaning, we thrive, right? If we have something, it seems, there's some research out there that says women can actually do pretty well autonomously without a partner. It seems like men, I don't, for whatever reason, this could be biological, it could be socialized. We need to like martyr ourselves for something. We need to have something to, to leave in that we can want to fight for. I don't know, maybe it's, who knows? But I feel like there was a deconstruction of that meaning in society, and men weren't taught like that it's okay to be a man, and what does it look like to be a man? What can you believe in as a man? What can you serve? And without getting into too deep into the roots of this, but like postmodern ideology is the deconstruction of meaning, and that bears poor fruit. And so I think I've seen that when you lose sight of that bigger picture, something that you believe in bigger than yourself, people start to pursue pleasure over like service. And we create both soft and selfish people. And so there's a real paradox there. And I kind of address this in the third way that this is humans across the board. I'm talking about men here, but humans across the board, right? You need to take care of yourself first, but not so that you can be selfish. You need to take care of yourself first, figure out who you are and what you need, and how to set boundaries and do all those things to heal yourself so that you can be a gift to others and the world, right? But I think that that's something that we have to peel back some layers to get there and understand that fully.
That's spot on. I mean, there's so much there, but I really believe the same thing is that, the external pursuits or the external identity hasn't borne the fruit that we've wanted it to. And so having people go back and say, well, who am I? What do I really, really want? And it's hard. It is difficult to sit with that and peeling back and knowing that you're worthy of that quest and that you're worthy the minute you came in is difficult for people. So I appreciate what you're saying. And I think one of the things that I do in this work is I try to help people. We've lost our own inner signal, and how do we find our way back and give our permission to explore that? So how do you help someone listen inward again? I mean, you talked about when they're in pain, going with them on the journey and being there with them and unpacking all of that and the responsibility that they feel. But when you get them to understand to that point where they're kind of on the journey and you're walking with them and then turning their attention inward, how do you work with people to listen inward again?
First, before I answer that, I want to comment on something you said that I thought was just beautiful. And you talked about somebody recognizing their worthiness. And I think that shame is one of the most destructive emotions in psychology, right? And people don't recognize their worth. And I think of a human in my office and just a beautiful individual. And I had all these letters written about him, fans, people who said he was wonderful. He hadn't read those. They were all in the box. He wouldn't read them because he hated himself so much and didn't believe he was deserving of that. And our therapy was actually like some exposure work, reading those, right? Because trying to address that shame, trying to help somebody get in touch with their worth. And that's complex for each client. But to answer your question, I guess more clinically, I actually use a sports psychology analysis to help people get in touch with their deepest self. There's this book called The Inner Game of Tennis, and it's great for young athletes. I know your son's a quarterback, and yeah, have him read that. And we talk about self one versus self two. And the gentleman who wrote that, his name was Timothy Galloway, and he worked with some of the world's best tennis players. And he said, get all these tennis players that would come in, and they would want to, hey, Doc, I gotta put my elbow this way, I gotta put my feet that way, and they were hyper focused and trying to fix themselves. And he would call that self one. And he said, that's necessary in any sport, but there's a self two in you that you got to get in touch with, which is much deeper. So these were finely tuned athletes. They didn't even realize they could change the game because of their skills. So he would talk about that deeper part of themselves. He would just have them hit the ball, kind of like Mr. Miyagi type of stuff, right? But to kind of calm them down and get in touch with the deeper part of themselves. And he would call that self two. So sometimes in my office, we're talking about what's your self one, where you're trying too hard, and what's your self two, where you can learn to listen to deeper parts of yourself. And how do you get in touch with that? And I think it's different for different people. You highlighted some of that in your work. Some people it's nature, some people it's meditation or prayer, but there's other ways. And, in my sessions through the process, I'm kind of looking for it. And then you kind of tap into it and you help them tap into it. Rarely is there like an aha moment, one moment, but it's a process that I see unfold. And it's beautiful. It's a privilege on my end to see it. Like it's why I love my work.
Wonderful. And I'll post something about the book and we'll highlight that for those on YouTube. You can find the description and a link to the book. But you're hitting on something that is so important to me. You're talking about that little thing, whether it's Mr. Miyagi, the tennis thing, the repetition, the place wherever it is that connects you to who you are, go there. And it can be many. And there is never a big aha moment. Sometimes I say to people, just keep doing the things where you feel at peace and in connection with yourself. And they may be many. And it may work for a while, and then you may change to something else. But that's the listening part of it. So, and again, that's like big self versus little self, which that concept is all over in psychology, right? And but so yeah, it's great. I think listening inward takes patience, it takes practice, and it takes, in many ways, just a sense of wonder. I wish if I had it in a bottle, I could hand it. It's to your point, it's different for everyone. The journey is so, I think, the gift, in doing it. So
Yeah, yeah. And once the pain starts to lessen, you can start to enjoy the journey, right? Like when pain's predominant, you spend your entire life trying to avoid pain. That's what addiction is, that's what the numbness is. But once the pain abates a little bit, then you can start to pursue like passion. You can get in touch with yourself. And I use all kind of my wife's a forestry major. I use all kind of tree metaphors, but I always say you gotta know what kind of tree you are. You know what I mean? If you're a maple, you gotta know you're a maple. If you're a pine tree, you gotta know you're a pine. But the problem is all the pines are looking at the maples and saying, "Oh, look at those beautiful bright colors. I wish I could be like that." The maples are looking at the pines like, oh, they can stay green in the winter, but no one kind of knows what type of tree they are. But if you know it, it tells you what type of soil you need. It tells you what type of climate you need. So people need to know themselves more than they need to change themselves. And that's what your work points to all the time.
yeah, what a profound statement. And I love the tree, the analogies. Those are lovely. Thank you for that. I could go
Yes.
down in this conversation for a long time just on this topic, but we're going to move on because I want to talk to you about your writing in the third way, the correct lens. So I really enjoyed it, and you do. I guess I mentioned a bit of storytelling to illuminate your points, and that is very helpful. But it's your manifesto. It's a deceptively simple idea that most people don't get stuck because they lack intelligence or resolve or love. It's just because they can't see. And I would say that's probably the mind and the pain. But what do you mean about seeing? Like what is the real problem there?
I think it's conditioning and attachment. There's two things that preclude us from seeing. One is by conditioning, I mean programming, by these certain lenses and narratives we have in our head that we've never thought to question. Right? A lot of times we see the world through our own lens and we just assume it's true. But the reality is everybody goes into a different situation and sees something differently. And what's the difference is our programming, right? So three people walk into the room and deal with a difficult person. Three of them could feel different ways about that person. What it was their evaluation, a subtle evaluation and interpretation of the situation that led to the feeling. But people have never learned to observe their thoughts. That takes a little bit
Yeah.
of training to do
Yep.
that. So that's that conditioning piece. That's classic CBT, cognitive
Yep.
behavioral psychology, where we teach that. But then the second part, attachments. And the Buddhists had this right. Buddhism and other religions, I don't ever think they were intended to be religions. I joke in my practice, I say, this is why we can't have nice things, right? Because what's something that's really beautiful and amazing, like Christianity to be, but it gets turned into a way to control people and other things. But some of the Eastern thought focuses a lot on attachment, and people confuse attachment and love oftentimes. Like love is freedom, love is a behavior, right? But our attachments to certain things, sometimes it's our attachments to ideas, can cause a lot of suffering. So when we basically, as somebody's working in therapy and they're unpacking those different lenses and so forth, sometimes we just teach them to be a scientist with their thinking. Have you ever thought to question
Hmm.
that?
Hmm.
So we teach people how to try to be objective and functional with their thinking, and then also to recognize their attachments and their blind spots. And sometimes by fixing that lens, then you'll find that people are free as opposed to compulsive.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it's literally, the mind as an ally, not a dictator, like really to kind of witness and your thoughts is and that's why meditation can help in terms of training the mind to be more quiet. But there's also the observation piece, which I think is really important. I had a professor that would repeat like the reality doesn't match the tape. So meaning we could be in a utopia, but you kind of highlighted this in some of your stories, but inside, if we can't see that, if the tape that we're running is a shame tape or the same, like the man couldn't
Yeah,
see the
yeah,
beautiful
yeah.
letters, like so what is really going on out there, we can't see because what's going on in our minds is contrasting that. So I do believe that, yeah, so it's a great example of learning to really kind of look within and with our attachment. And so thank you for that. Another great answer. And not that I'm grading you, but I'm really enjoying the conversation.
Yeah, me
Okay.
too. Thank you. Thank you. And
Yeah.
that what you're saying about that narrative is right. Like we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are, right? And it's through
Yeah.
that lens and narrative. It's like wearing sunglasses. So I think you
Yeah.
nailed it in the way you said it as well.
Thank you. So, let's talk about trauma for a little bit because you describe it as building a lens that once protected us, but it can eventually turn on us. And so I really agree with this. So, how can someone who has a trauma lens who's been wearing it for so long, so what can they do? And again, Are you teaching them the same, like looking at attachment, looking at their conditioning? Do you treat that differently? Because there's all different types of traumas, right? So do you treat that slightly differently, or do you use the same approach?
Same approach, but there's two things that are happening in therapy at the same time. There's the content and there's the process. I actually, the content is what we're teaching, what we're talking about, psychoeducation about the trauma. It might be some basic exposure work and that where you help people lean into it and talk about it and so forth. So there's that skill building piece, or some of the stuff I was talking about earlier with working with somebody's lens, teaching them to question it and challenge it and so forth. So there's that content piece, but then there's also that the process of therapy, which involves being vulnerable and having your safe place. And we believe what happens is you're actually taking the limbic system in your brain where a lot of this emotion is stuck, if you will, and you're starting to link it up with the frontal lobe of your brain, the part of your brain that's like the most evolved part, and it kind of can unlock trauma when you help it when you start to process it. That's the more analytic answer, of if is that what
Yeah.
you were asking, or is
Yeah,
this
no, it isn't. Yeah, I think people need to know that there's a process and an approach and a framework for this, and that is what is going on in therapy. There's the content and the process, and so the content is the story, from the who you're working with, and the process is how you're helping them kind of work through it so they can start to heal and see it.
yeah.
It
I'm gonna, I made a commitment talking to you too. I'll be, vulnerable, share a little bit myself today too. And it's, you have to make a choice not to live in fear anymore. Those who know me well know this about me. Young captain, the military, and everything like that. And I was, my dissertation was on suicide, and I loved the military. I loved working with these people. I was a passionate young provider, working my way up. But I was a kid. I was 26. And work with a kid one evening, and gave him my cell phone. I was on call, different things like that. But kid shot himself, and for me, after that, it really, it impacted me. I started to operate based on fear, right? If you were suicidal and you had a weapon, man, I was going to secure that weapon because I started to get this mindset, not under my watch, like out of my own guilt and need to control everything and fear. But what happened there was you start to control humans, you lose your passion, you start to feel it's that overdeveloped responsibility I've seen in some of my clients, right? And so what I try to do is operate based on my passion, not my fear. I try to operate on like I call it loving detachment. I can't control exactly what someone's going to do. I can take appropriate precautions. What that does for you when you let go of that overdeveloped sense of responsibility, or you choose not to live in fear, or choose not to hate yourself for a mistake, what happens there is you start to become free again. You give up the whole game of proving yourself. You're already like, hey, I've made big mistakes. I'm just a human. I'm not a great human. I'm not a bad human. I'm just a human. And that allows you to be free, right? So some of my own personal experiences with this stuff, I really try to bring that into session, not to ever make it about me, but because I kind of walk that walk in some ways. You know what I mean? And my guys have been worse than me. Some of the people on my caseload are some of the most impressive humans you'll ever meet in your life because of the things they've seen, the things they've endured, and they have to make a choice. Sometimes combat vets sometimes aren't traumatized by just what they've seen. They're traumatized by what they've done. And sometimes they can't forgive themselves. And so they have to make a choice in the here and now, in the here and now. So what are you going to do now? And that you can choose to sink into it, to become fear-based, or you can choose to let go and be who you need to be. So sometimes that's that, like on a personal level, that's that process I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, really great story and very good illumination. One of the things you talk about in the third way is like that we kind of get trapped in either or thinking, and you encourage people to kind of hold two opposing views at the same time. I think if you could just talk about that for a minute, because I mean, a little bit, just the answer you described is there's a little bit in there, like I'm feeling fear in it. But you tell in your own words, what are you saying when you think that holding two opposing views can be helpful to people?
Wisdom always emerges when you can appreciate the complexity of things. So in psychology, formally, that's a dialectic, two things being true at the same time. And appreciating that can help you hold and embrace your own narrative, but also appreciate somebody's narrative that's different from yours, right? And so we see oftentimes in society, a couple of really important examples are control and acceptance, and there's a real balancing act there between the two, right? Life is a balancing act there, but some of these high control people with an overdeveloped sense of responsibility struggle with that. Sometimes different, like masculine and feminine elements of the self, right? Like you can, and I mean masculinity and femininity as constructs, not man and woman per se, but there's like a balancing act there of what's your masculine energy, what's your feminine energy. But when you can kind of appreciate dialectics, paradox, complexity, that frees you up to see reality more clearly, in my opinion.
Yeah. I always see that kind of as a both and. And then I have this mantra that I say to myself all the time, which is so freeing. And I say, I'm a not knower. It doesn't mean that I'm walking around cluelessly. I mean, but it allows me, when I see something that is possible or is outside of kind of my belief system, I try to take a look at it and be like, I don't really know, do I? Like, I'm saying all these things. It's freeing to be a not knower and just be kind of accepting of the possibility. So it
know?
might be slightly different, but I find deep comfort in not knowing. I get a little worried when I know completely.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of humility and wisdom in that, right?
There is.
When you try to understand that you don't have to know, that opens you up to
Yes.
a mindset of curiosity as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to judgment, a
Yeah.
mindset of faith as opposed to like
Yeah.
needing to teach everything. And you know what I mean? So it's a very healthy way to approach the world, and it
Yeah.
opens you up to new ideas as opposed to being fused to your own. That mindset, if we could approach others with curiosity as opposed to judgment, man, this world would be better, right? It's that humble mindset you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Lovely. There's a spiritual thread running through all of your writing that you don't hide or dress up, with any clinical language. And, you reference surrender, higher power, and, you do the beautiful metaphor of reconnecting to, the trees. So, how do you hold the spiritual and the clinical together? I mean, particularly with clients who might reject anything that sounds like faith, how do you kind of weave that in and have it become resonant for clients or people you work with?
Oh, yeah, it's different for everybody, but I'll say, faith can be a beautiful thing. Blind faith can be a dangerous thing. So I saw you reference Joseph Campbell. I love Joseph Campbell
Yeah,
with that,
yeah,
where he talks about how deep truths are revealed through story, through
yeah,
myth, so
yeah,
through some of those things, right? So sometimes we'll be talking about things like Star Wars or Harry Potter, and some of those deep themes through there. Sometimes we're talking, we're packaging it in science because faith and science aren't irreconcilable, right? We'll talk Einstein. Sometimes it'll be in philosophy. We'll be talking Marcus Aurelius and the Logos and some of the greatest thinkers of our time. What they leaned into was faith, but it's not this cheap faith, right? It's not some dude in the sky with a beard and a staff.
yep,
What we're talking about is just belief in something bigger. And so another word for God, quote, is reality and trusting being. In some ways, it's a miracle that we're right here. Like, right, you and I are here thousands of
yeah,
miles away talking through a piece of plastic, yet there's some type of energy exchange. What the hell is that, right?
yeah.
There's ways of describing it that are not fluffy and flowery that I think can be, understood and embraced by men who might have a critical eye.
I like the marriage of science and spirituality. And, when science, spirituality, and really it's psychology and spirituality, when those two meet, I'm like, oh, that's like the best thing ever. And then I
It
also
is.
have to look at science because I'm also trying to get materialists to realize that, we still don't know everything yet. So I find great comfort in faith. And it's a faith in something bigger than yourself. And it's a faith founded
Yeah.
in love. So when I do, because I talk about spirit guides on this program, and so I've had to come out of my comfort zone and share my beliefs around. I've studied a lot of and near death experiences. I'm interested, and I do hold this piece of I don't know, but the most comforting piece to me is a faith that is the thread throughout everything, which is that we all have our own divinity within us, that we're all worthy. We are all worthy the moment we come here, and that we are all connected. And whatever you want to call that is fine with me. But, the humanity in me sees the humanity in others. And it's one of the
There you
reasons I
go.
do this work because I feel like the more we heal ourselves, then we can heal the collective. And I have faith that we can all do that. And so I like faith, and I will put whatever feels integrous to me, any packaging on it that can resonate with people. I don't like contort myself, but I'm like, that's okay. Like we both
Yeah.
know that, so I appreciate your perspective too. And story is a great way to get people to click into that.
Deep truth always resonates.
Yeah.
It really does. I like the way that you said that as well. I sometimes I'll say in here, believe Ted Lasso style. You know what I mean? It doesn't
Yeah.
have to believe what I
Yeah.
believe. It doesn't have to be, but belief itself, right? And you
Yeah.
can trust something bigger. That the kind of, and that idea, like the divine in me resonates with the divine in you, right?
Yeah.
Not to be
Yeah.
again too flowery in my language, but it's like
Yeah.
there's something there. I've seen this time and time and time again. Deep truth resonates with people, even the
Mhm.
most skeptical
Yeah.
People, skeptic, critical people, deep truth resonates. It's an experience. It's not a cognitive thing. It's a heart thing.
It is. It is. So you're good. And I always say nothing from that ever comes from the heart is bad, you know.
There you
So
go.
yeah. We talk about pain. Pain is a part of this. I think we're souls in human bodies here, and we've signed up for things and the lessons in this lifetime, and pain is a part of that. Pain is part of the deal here on Earth, and
Sure is.
my experience with pain has been that it's been transformative. And often when I see people heading for or in pain, I'm mostly rooting for them, that they can get through to the other side. But what does transformation look like in practice? Like when you're working people through the pain, when you're starting to see them come out to the other side and kind of look at it potentially as a lesson? It's not required that we look at them as lessons,
Yeah.
but the transformation from is, what does that look like when men see that from the other side?
Yeah, that question, when you'd sent me some of the questions, I was looking at that one and I really thought about that. And I want to answer that one honestly. Very rarely do I see like that one aha moment. It is a gradual process, but what I see is through appropriate mirroring, which happens in the therapy room. Like mirroring, I'm mirroring things back to people, and I'm not just blowing sunshine at them, right? I'm mirroring things back and helping them to see themselves more objectively. But in my mind, it starts to happen when enough vulnerability takes place where they can start to see themselves as they are, not as they imagine themselves to be. So they start to see the goodness in themselves. I got people here who hate themselves and they're showing up at 7 in the morning to work on themselves so that they can be better dads for their kids. I mean, who is that, right? That's a beautiful thing, right? But you got to mirror that back to somebody to show them that. So what happens is they start to see the goodness in themselves. They start to see what's there, and then the healing starts to happen. And once you start to see that, you become empowered, right? The flame grows a little bit brighter in you, and you start to operate more on love and less on fear.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. So staying on the topic of faith, I mean, you have a Catholic background as well, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, and so do I. And you were just in New Mexico, and you went to the Center for Action and Contemplation, right? Yeah, right. CIC.
Yes,
Richard
yes.
Richard Rohr's, yeah, who we share.
Love that guy.
Yeah, a love for, yeah. And he's a Franciscan priest who spent his life building the bridge between Christian mysticism and deep inner work and transformation. And if you haven't read any of his work or listened to any of them, his talks, I do believe is a mystic. It doesn't matter, but it's truly a blessing to read his work. And he teaches us that the soul isn't something we have to earn or protect. It's something that we already are. So you don't hide the spiritual in your work usually, but what do you think the soul is? Like, what do you actually believe our soul is?
Deep questions, Ellen. And I think I have to use metaphor to describe it. I use a lot of metaphor in therapy, but sometimes if I was trying to explain my belief to somebody, I might say like if you close your eyes and you imagine like this beautiful bright sun that then explodes into a million shattering diamonds like pieces, you know what I mean? And one of those lands in every one of our hearts. And kind of like if you're, we're getting older, right? ET from the 80s, but you remember his heart would light up with certain things, right? We have to find what makes it light up. And that there's that part of us that like that part of me connects with that part in you. That's what like a lot of love and connection is. So we all have this God spark in us that illuminates. Sometimes it illuminates when we're doing what we're meant to do, like our craft, like an artist or a musician or an athlete when they're passionate about something. Sometimes it lights up when we're connecting with somebody that we love, but it's that we need each other and our life work to make that thing light up. And I would kind of call that the soul.
Oh,
Best as I can describe it right
yeah,
now,
yeah,
at
no,
least.
yeah, that's it.
You're
Yeah,
giving me too much credit if you think I can answer that one, Alan.
no, I love that explanation. So following up on that, I mean, we talked in the beginning about how men are kind of wired and like to have meaning, although like meaning is a good thing, but over attachment to it, meaning associated with responsibility can cause some problems. But do you believe that we come here with a purpose? I mean, you talked about the soul being lighted up and also have needing somebody else in relationship to be resonant but do you believe that we come here with a purpose in this lifetime? Is there something specific that each person is meant to live?
Yeah, I do believe that, but I believe it's one of those things that becomes pretty paradoxical. If you try to strive too hard, you get stuck. It's like one of those Chinese finger traps. So sometimes I might say, do what's yours to do. Like the most important thing is what you're doing right now. The most important person is the person right in front of you, right? And it's kind of like Eckhart Tolle's power of now, right? What's happening is like the present moment is all that exists. But our illusion, our mind brings us into the future or clings us to some narrative about the past, right? And that gets us really, really stuck. So the most important person right in front of you, that's your mission. But do I believe we're here to serve something bigger, right? Yeah, like love, I'd say, probably.
Yeah. 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 I have a friend who, and many teachers think this, that we're here really to get rid of fear. And I love be the person that you are, the person who's here right now, right today. So, earlier on, I've had this thing about live your jam. It was never a live your jam, but I've had this, whatever it is, it's an idea or an insight in me for years. And when I first took live your jam, which really is leading a life from the inside out, and years ago, I had it kind of at this, crossroad of where your inner passion meets like kind of what you're doing in life. And I knew that there was an inherent problem in it because it was much too externally and form focused. But I didn't
Hmm.
at the time know how to resolve that. So I went on with my life. And, so what I want to say is I think that that's the part of the mystery of all of this work and purpose is that it's continual and it's not, then we get into destination addiction. Like when I have this,
Yes.
when I get there. And what I
Yeah.
always say to people is it's just the idea of keeping going and showing up every day for yourself and making the best decisions on the person that you are that day and learning how to love yourself. So it really is this kind of iterative that doesn't stop until
Yes.
we're no longer in this body. So
I love that. I love that. Yeah, there is no point of arrival, right?
yeah, there
Well,
isn't.
death, right? But but
Yeah. Yeah.
we embrace process over outcome. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I love the way you're thinking there and what you're describing. And it's something you have to hold loosely.
It is something you have to hold loosely. And I think that can be, I know I can speak, that's scary for people. It's hard to not, like you said, like I introduced you and gave you all these, introduced you correctly and gave you all the titles and your, whatever it is, and we need that, right. To kind of establish where we are. And asked people to do on purpose and soul is to let go of all of that. And
Mhm.
there's no form. It's just simply showing up for yourself every day in these small, beautiful ways all the time that kind of create our own sovereignty. And we're not really taught to do that. So
Yeah.
and then we have life along the way that can create these obstacles that get us stuck or in pain. So yeah, okay. Love this conversation. I want to talk to you a little bit about, primarily the veterans and athletes, men who are trained to project strength. And everything that you've described today applies to a man who's built a persona to survive. We all do, right? I just referenced that.
Yeah.
So what would you say right now to, the man who's listening, who recognizes himself in this conversation, but just doesn't know where to start?
I would say choose to open up, choose to be vulnerable, find somebody, right? It can be a therapist, it can be a friend, it can be a coach, but to talk about the pain and take the risk to do it. Because if you do that, that's where healing begins. And then I'd say choose to love yourself, even if you want to hate yourself, even if you can come up with all the data to support hating yourself, choose to love yourself because when you do that, it's functional. It bears good fruit. It literally can turn that choice to choose to love yourself the way you would like a good friend or something like that. That will bear good fruit in the world, in your life. And we need people who've done that. So make the choice to open up and make the choice never to betray yourself. And if you do those two things, you'll find you start to heal. And I think that what we're seeing right now is a lot of people who just need healing.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. What a beautiful note to end on, to choose to love yourself and reminding ourselves of that we're worthy of the love. And, there are these subconscious beliefs that I think, Joseph Campbell Jung would say there's a collective unconscious. There's beliefs out there that we don't really know where some of them are in story, but people, one of the things I want to say is that we do struggle with this sense of worthiness, right? Or that if I am my authentic self, I will be rejected. And one of the ways to unpack that is to love yourself and to tell yourself you are worthy. And so it's a great way to end this. I really admire the work that you're doing with men. And I mentioned to you as we started this, I sent one of your Instagram reels to one of my sons, right, on athletes. So To everybody, I found Dr. Don out just on Instagram, and I don't know, I was just like, this guy is saying things that are succinct and clear, and he's helping men. I come from a different perspective and experience, but I have so much empathy for men because the way that I see many of us are struggling, it's very, very similar, but there's different experiences, potentially given our gender. So I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I really appreciate the time that you've spent on here.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your kindness. And it was easy, when you invited me on, I read some of what you've written, Ellen. Is beautiful. And I think you're helping a lot of people, and you're embracing what you teach, right? And
Yeah.
pursuing your passion and all
Yeah.
that. So just tons of respect for that. And I just really appreciate how gracious you were today.
Yeah, same. Thank you for your time and graciousness as well. So, everybody, we will have all the links to where you can find Dr. Don in the YouTube description. And I appreciate your time and thank you again. Take care and signing off. Thanks for listening to the Live Your Jam podcast. If today's episode sparked insight or inspiration, follow that thread. That's your inner wisdom speaking. Share this episode with a friend who'd vibe with it, and if you're moved to, leave a review so others can find their way here too. Remember, the dreams that stir within you aren't frivolous, they're instructions from your soul. You can listen on Spotify and Apple Podcast or watch the video version on YouTube to see me and my amazing guests in action. Until next time, keep listening in and keep living your jam.